Emily Carter never imagined fear could feel so ordinary at first. Life in suburban Northern California had always been predictable, almost comfortingly dull. Her small two-story rental sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac where the loudest nighttime noise usually came from distant traffic humming along the freeway miles away. As a single mother raising her 8-year-old son Tyler, routine was everything. Dinner at 6, homework by 7, bedtime stories before lights out. Stability was her survival strategy after a messy divorce that had drained both her bank account and her sense of trust in people. The first sound happened on a Tuesday night just past midnight. Emily awoke abruptly, her heart pounding without understanding why. The house felt unusually still, yet she could swear she heard a faint dragging noise above her bedroom ceiling. It sounded like something heavy being shifted slowly across wood. She held her breath, waiting for the sound to repeat, but silence swallowed everything again. Eventually, she convinced herself it was probably a raccoon or loose insulation shifting in the attic crawl space, something landlords always promised to fix but rarely did. Exhaustion pulled her back into sleep, though unease lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Over the next few weeks, small irregularities began stacking together in ways that felt impossible to ignore. Groceries she distinctly remembered buying seemed to disappear faster than usual. She blamed Tyler's growing appetite until she noticed items missing that he refused to eat, like plain yogurt and canned tuna. Then there were mornings when she entered the bathroom and found the shower floor slightly damp, even though neither she nor Tyler had used it yet. She began checking faucets compulsively, suspecting leaks or humidity problems, but everything always appeared normal. Each explanation she created dissolved under closer inspection, leaving her increasingly restless. The breaking point came one Friday evening when Emily returned home earlier than expected. As she stepped inside, she heard a faint scuffling noise directly above the hallway. The sound moved slowly, almost carefully, as if someone were attempting not to be noticed. Her chest tightened while she stood frozen, staring at the ceiling vent that led toward the attic crawl space. Tyler ran past her laughing, completely unaware of her rising panic. That moment forced Emily to confront the terrifying possibility she had been avoiding. Animals didn't move that deliberately. Animals didn't open sealed cereal boxes or leave shampoo bottles slightly repositioned. That night, after Tyler fell asleep, Emily sat alone at her kitchen table, researching security systems while gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every survival instinct inside her demanded proof. By dawn, she had ordered 2 discrete motion-activated cameras scheduled for same-day installation. She kept telling herself this was simply precaution, yet deep inside, she feared the footage might confirm something she wasn't ready to face. The cameras would be installed tomorrow, and Emily believed answers were finally within reach. She had no idea that what she was about to uncover would make her question whether her home had ever truly been hers and all. If you enjoy deeply unsettling, true-inspired horror stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Canon of Darkness and stay with me, because the footage Emily reviews tomorrow night will reveal something that turns suspicion into absolute terror. The technician arrived just after noon, carrying a small black toolkit and the casual confidence of someone who spent his days making people feel safer inside their own homes. Emily forced a polite smile while Tyler followed the man around, asking endless questions about how cameras worked and whether they could catch ghosts. The technician laughed it off, explaining that the devices only responded to motion and stored footage through a cloud server that Emily could access from her phone. While he worked, Emily tried to maintain normal conversation, though her eyes constantly drifted toward the ceiling access panel in the hallway.
Every creak of the ladder against the wall made her stomach tighten, as if the house itself were holding a secret that wanted to stay hidden. One camera was positioned facing the kitchen and living room, covering most of the first floor, where food and movement irregularities had been happening. The second camera was mounted carefully inside the attic crawl space after the technician used a portable ladder to reach the narrow entry hatch.
He explained that the crawl space appeared mostly empty, filled with insulation rolls, wiring lines, and dusty wooden beams. Emily felt temporary relief when he mentioned he did not see signs of animal nests or structural damage. When he finished installation, he handed her instructions for monitoring the live feed and wished her a safe evening before leaving the quiet cul-de-sac behind him. That night, Emily attempted to focus on normal life, preparing pasta dinner while helping Tyler study spelling words. She checked the camera feed several times, watching ordinary domestic scenes unfold on her phone screen. Tyler eventually fell asleep around 9, leaving Emily alone with her anxious thoughts and a glass of cheap red wine she barely tasted. Around midnight, she curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone while the television played quietly in the background. She almost drifted off when a motion notification suddenly appeared across her screen, triggered by the attic camera. Her fingers hesitated before opening the footage playback, and when she finally pressed the screen, the recording began with complete stillness. Dust particles floated through dim infrared lighting, creating the illusion of falling snow inside the narrow space. Nearly 20 seconds passed before something shifted behind a stack of insulation rolls. A human hand slowly emerged, pale and trembling as it pushed aside fiberglass padding. Emily felt her throat tighten as a gaunt man crawled into view, moving with the exhausted caution of someone who had learned to survive by staying invisible. His beard looked tangled and uneven, while his clothes appeared layered with dirt and grease stains. He carefully reached into a small hidden bag tucked between wooden beams and pulled out a wrapped sandwich that looked unmistakably like the one Emily packed for Tyler earlier that afternoon. Emily's pulse hammered violently while she watched the man sit quietly in her attic, eating food stolen from her refrigerator as if it were routine. He finished the sandwich, drank water from a plastic bottle, and then disappeared back into the insulation shadows with disturbing familiarity. Shock kept Emily frozen for several minutes before survival instinct finally kicked in. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone to dial emergency services, convinced she had just discovered a stranger secretly living above her family for months. However, as she prepared to call the police, a horrifying realization stopped her cold. The motion alert timestamp revealed this footage had been recorded 2 nights earlier, meaning someone had already been moving through her home while she slept peacefully below. As Emily replayed the video in disbelief, she noticed something that made her blood run colder than fear itself.
Behind the crawling man, deep within the darkness, another shape briefly shifted before the footage ended, and whatever it was had been watching him the entire time. Emily sat motionless on her couch, replaying the footage repeatedly while her mind struggled to process the layered terror unfolding before her. The discovery of the man alone had already shattered her sense of safety, yet the possibility of another hidden presence buried deeper within the crawlspace pushed her fear into something far more primal. She studied the recording frame by frame, zooming in until the image pixelated, hoping she had misinterpreted the flicker of movement behind him. Every replay revealed the same unsettling detail, a faint shift in the shadows that could not be explained by lighting distortion or camera malfunction. The movement carried intention, and the longer she stared, the more certain she became that the first intruder had not been alone inside her home. Her hands trembled as she finally dialed emergency services, forcing herself to speak calmly while explaining that she believed someone had been living inside her attic. The dispatcher asked measured questions about immediate danger, weapons, and whether she could safely leave the house. Emily glanced toward Tyler's bedroom door, knowing she could not risk waking him into panic without understanding how serious the situation truly was. She quietly confirmed that they were safe for the moment, but requested urgent police assistance. The dispatcher instructed her to remain inside a locked room until officers arrived, promising they were already on their way. Minutes stretched endlessly as Emily gathered Tyler from his bedroom under the excuse of a late-night movie, attempting to keep her voice steady while he rubbed sleep from his eyes and asked why she looked pale. She locked them inside her bedroom, positioning a chair under the door handle, despite knowing it offered minimal protection against a determined intruder. Her hand remained clenched in her hand as she monitored the live camera feeds, terrified that movement might suddenly reappear above them. Every subtle creak of the house sounded magnified, transforming normal nighttime settling noises into imagined footsteps creeping across wooden beams overhead.
When police finally arrived, flashing red and blue lights painted the cul-de-sac with urgency that made Emily's neighbors peek cautiously through their windows. 2 officers entered the house cautiously, listening intently while she showed them the recorded footage. Their expressions hardened as they watched the man emerge from insulation shadows, confirming her worst fears without needing to say it aloud. One officer radioed for backup while the other carefully prepared to inspect the attic crawlspace. They instructed Emily and Tyler to remain outside in a patrol car where it was safer, though Emily could not stop watching the house through the vehicle window as if it had suddenly become an unfamiliar structure harboring something alive. The officers entered the attic nearly 20 minutes later, moving slowly through insulation and wiring while maintaining radio contact with colleagues below. Emily's breath caught each time she heard static crackle through the officer's shoulder radio. Finally, one officer's voice broke through, announcing that they had located signs of habitation, including food wrappers, blankets, and personal belongings hidden between support beams. Relief almost surfaced when he reported finding no one present inside the crawlspace. Emily exhaled shakily, believing the nightmare might finally be ending, until the officer's voice returned with a new discovery that erased any comfort she had begun to feel. He described finding 2 separate sleeping areas constructed at opposite ends of the crawlspace, each arranged with disturbing precision as though the occupants intentionally kept distance from one another. And one of those sleeping areas appeared recently abandoned, while the other still felt warm to the touch. Emily sat rigidly inside the patrol car while Tyler leaned against her shoulder, still too young to fully understand the magnitude of what was unfolding around them. The cold leather seat beneath her felt strangely grounding, yet her mind remained trapped inside the walls of her house, where officers carefully documented the crawlspace discovery. She watched as another police vehicle arrived, followed by a forensic technician carrying sealed evidence bags and specialized lighting equipment. The quiet suburban street had transformed into a tense investigation zone, and Emily felt an overwhelming sense of exposure, knowing her neighbors were silently observing the nightmare unraveling in her once peaceful home.
Nearly 40 minutes passed before one of the officers approached the patrol car and asked Emily to step outside briefly. Tyler remained inside with another officer while she walked toward her house, her legs trembling with each step closer to the front door. The officer explained that the crawlspace revealed clear evidence of long-term habitation by at least one individual, possibly 2, based on separate bedding areas and personal belongings that suggested different routines. He carefully described how one section contained layered blankets, empty canned food containers, and a collection of handwritten notes scribbled on torn cardboard pieces.
The second area appeared far more organized, with folded clothing, sealed food packages, and even a small battery-powered lantern arranged neatly beside a compact backpack. Emily struggled to process the unsettling contrast between the two living spaces. The chaotic area suggested survival driven by desperation, while the organized section hinted at someone methodical and patient. The officer continued explaining that there were signs indicating the occupants might have avoided direct contact with one another, possibly using the crawlspace at alternating times. He mentioned finding faint scratch marks carved into one of the wooden beams, almost resembling tally marks that counted days or events. Emily felt her chest tighten as she imagined two strangers silently coexisting above her family, each carrying unknown intentions and private histories that had unfolded inches above her ceiling. The forensic technician soon joined the conversation, revealing that they had recovered fingerprints from food packaging and water bottles that would be processed through national databases. They also discovered a small ventilation opening leading directly above Emily's hallway closet, creating a concealed observation point that allowed anyone inside the crawlspace to watch movements below without being noticed. The realization struck Emily like a physical blow, forcing her to grip the porch railing as nausea surged through her body. Every private moment inside her home suddenly felt compromised, as if invisible eyes had been studying her daily routines for months. Before leaving, the officers assured Emily that patrol units would monitor the area overnight while they attempted to locate the individuals responsible. They advised her to stay temporarily with relatives or at a hotel until the investigation advanced further. Emily agreed, though her thoughts remained tangled with unanswered questions about who these people were and how they had entered her home undetected for so long. As she gathered essential belongings and prepared to leave the house, she paused near the hallway closet where the hidden ventilation opening had been discovered. Something about the narrow vent unsettled her deeply, compelling her to shine her phone flashlight upward for one last glance before leaving. Dust particles floated lazily inside the opening, yet her breath caught when she noticed faint smudge marks along the vent's interior surface, marks that looked disturbingly recent. And as her flashlight beam shifted slightly, she thought she saw something reflecting deeper inside the darkness that did not resemble dust or insulation at all, as if something had just moved away from the opening seconds before she looked inside. Emily barely remembered the drive to the small roadside hotel recommended by one of the officers, because her thoughts remained trapped inside the silent ventilation shaft she had inspected moments before leaving her house. Tyler fell asleep quickly in the passenger seat, his innocence painfully untouched by the full truth of their situation. Emily kept replaying the memory of the smudge marks inside the vent, convinced that whatever she had glimpsed was not simply leftover debris. The reflection, she noticed, felt deliberate, almost reactive, as if something had shifted position to avoid her flashlight beam. By the time she parked outside the hotel lobby, her hands had tightened around the steering wheel so firmly that her fingers ached when she finally released her grip. The hotel room smelled faintly of industrial cleaning chemicals and aging carpet, offering a sterile safety that felt temporary rather than comforting. Tyler curled up on one of the beds while Emily double-checked the locks on the door and windows, instincts now guiding her every movement with restless urgency. She placed a chair against the doorknob despite knowing she was no longer inside her compromised house. Her mind refused to accept that distance equaled security.
After Tyler drifted into sleep, Emily sat at the small desk and reopened the security camera application, reviewing archived footage that stretched back several days before the police discovery. Hours slipped past while she watched ordinary scenes unfold across her phone screen. She studied each recording carefully, noticing subtle details she had previously ignored.
Around 3:17 a.m. on multiple nights, faint movement occurred near the hallway closet vent, though nothing clearly emerged from the darkness. The footage remained frustratingly ambiguous, capturing only shifting shadows and slight changes in light reflection that suggested presence without confirmation. Emily increased brightness and contrast settings repeatedly, hoping to expose clearer images hidden inside the shadows. Her exhaustion blurred the passing time until she finally reached footage recorded the night before police arrived. The recording began quietly, with the kitchen camera showing complete stillness. After nearly 15 minutes, the attic camera triggered another motion alert. Emily leaned forward, her pulse accelerating as the familiar bearded man crawled into view again. This time his movements appeared more frantic, as if he were searching for something he feared losing. He rummaged through his hidden belongings, stuffing items into a torn backpack while glancing repeatedly toward the far end of the crawlspace where the second sleeping area had been discovered earlier. His breathing looked rapid, and his posture carried visible tension, suggesting he was reacting to something unseen within the confined space. Then the man suddenly froze mid-movement, his head tilting slightly, as though he had heard something behind him. He turned slowly toward the deeper darkness of the crawlspace, and Emily watched his expression transform from irritation into unmistakable terror. His lips moved silently, as if whispering or pleading, though the camera recorded no audio. Seconds later, he abandoned his belongings entirely and scrambled toward the attic exit hatch with desperate urgency. His exit left the crawlspace disturbingly empty, yet the camera continued recording faint motion rippling through insulation behind the abandoned sleeping area long after he disappeared. Emily's heart pounded violently as she paused the footage, noticing something she had completely missed before. The insulation where the second sleeping area had been arranged began shifting outward gradually, almost like fabric breathing under pressure.
She leaned closer to her phone screen, adjusting brightness again, while dread settled deeper into her chest. The insulation bulged slowly, forming a shape that suggested someone crouching beneath it, waiting patiently for the first man to leave before emerging into the open crawlspace. Just as Emily prepared to zoom further into the recording, her phone screen glitched briefly before freezing entirely, leaving her staring at a blurred silhouette that looked eerily close to the camera lens. And in that distorted reflection, she could swear she saw what appeared to be eyes staring directly back at her through the screen. Emily stared at her frozen phone screen while a heavy silence pressed against the hotel room walls. The blurred silhouette remained locked in place, distorted by pixelated interference that flickered across the image like static trying to erase something that did not want to be seen. Her reflection faintly overlapped with the figure, creating a chilling illusion that someone stood directly behind her, though she knew she was alone. Her chest tightened as she refreshed the application repeatedly, hoping the glitch would clear itself. When the video finally resumed, the crawlspace appeared completely empty again, leaving Emily questioning whether she had truly seen the eyes staring back at her or if exhaustion had begun distorting her perception. Sleep felt impossible, yet fatigue weighed heavily on her body as she sat motionless at the desk, watching the security feed for another hour. She eventually forced herself to lie down beside Tyler, though she kept the phone screen illuminated against her pillow. Her thoughts spiraled through countless possibilities, trying to rationalize what she had witnessed. She wondered if the second intruder had tampered with the camera, causing interference while remaining hidden from view. The idea felt logical, yet it failed to explain the intense sensation she experienced while watching the frozen silhouette, a sensation that felt disturbingly personal, as though someone had been aware she was observing them. Morning arrived with pale sunlight leaking through the hotel curtains, bringing no relief to Emily's racing mind. Tyler woke cheerful and hungry, unaware of the sleepless night that had left dark circles beneath her eyes.
She forced herself into routine, ordering breakfast and pretending normalcy while discreetly checking her phone every few minutes. Around mid-morning, she received a call from the investigating officer, updating her on fingerprint analysis progress.
Preliminary results indicated that the bearded man likely matched records connected to a missing transient individual reported months earlier in a neighboring county. Authorities believed he had been living secretly in abandoned structures before possibly discovering Emily's attic crawlspace as shelter. However, the officer admitted they had found no identification evidence linked to the second occupant. No matching fingerprints appeared on recovered belongings, and forensic testing suggested the organized sleeping area contained items wiped unusually clean. The absence of trace evidence raised unsettling concerns that whoever occupied the second space had been intentionally avoiding detection with careful precision. Emily felt her stomach twist as she listened, realizing the unknown presence inside her home might have possessed greater awareness and patience than the desperate man already captured on camera. Later that afternoon, Emily reluctantly returned to her house, accompanied by 2 officers who planned to install additional surveillance equipment and reinforce attic entry points. The familiar structure looked unchanged from the outside, yet stepping across the threshold felt like entering a stranger's territory. The officers conducted another crawlspace inspection while Emily waited downstairs, listening to muffled movements above her ceiling that stirred memories of nights she had slept beneath unknown footsteps. After nearly an hour, the officers descended and confirmed that no individuals were currently inside the attic. They assured Emily that additional monitoring would help prevent further intrusion, though their cautious tone revealed lingering uncertainty. As they finished securing the attic hatch with temporary locking mechanisms, Emily walked slowly toward the kitchen where her first camera had been installed. She glanced at the live feed displayed on her phone, relieved to see the room sitting completely empty behind her. Then her breath caught when she noticed something that should not have been possible. The kitchen camera angle showed her standing alone near the counter, yet the shadow cast across the floor behind her stretched unnaturally longer than her body shape allowed, bending slightly toward the hallway closet as if something invisible stood close enough to share her silhouette.
And when Emily slowly turned around, the hallway behind her remained empty, even though the shadow on her phone screen had just shifted again. Emily's pulse pounded violently as she stared at her phone screen, unable to reconcile the impossible distortion she had just witnessed. The shadow displayed by the kitchen camera had stretched toward the hallway in a way that defied the natural angle of the ceiling light, creating a silhouette that suggested a second figure standing unnaturally close behind her. Her breathing slowed into shallow, cautious inhalations as she slowly turned her head toward the hallway, expecting to see someone stepping out from the darkness near the closet vent. The empty corridor stared back at her with unsettling stillness, yet the lingering memory of the shadow refused to fade from her mind. One of the officers noticed her frozen posture and asked if she felt unwell. Emily hesitated before showing him the live camera feed, explaining what she believed she had seen moments earlier. He studied the footage carefully, though the shadow now appeared normal, matching her body shape without any strange distortion. He suggested that shifting daylight combined with indoor lighting sometimes created optical illusions that could look frightening under stressful circumstances. Emily nodded politely, though his explanation felt hollow compared to the certainty she had experienced while watching the shadow bend unnaturally across the kitchen floor. The officers eventually completed their equipment installation and advised Emily to remain vigilant while investigators continued searching for the second intruder.
Once they left, silence returned to the house with a suffocating heaviness that made every faint creak sound amplified. Tyler remained at school for the afternoon, leaving Emily alone inside the house she no longer trusted. She forced herself to sit at the kitchen table, determined to review archived footage again in hopes of finding any overlooked details that might confirm or disprove her growing fears. Hours passed as she scanned through recordings captured over the previous month. She noticed small patterns emerging that she had not recognized before. On several
nights, faint motion disturbances occurred shortly after the bearded man returned to the crawlspace. These disturbances appeared as subtle shifts in insulation or brief light fluctuations near ventilation openings. The patterns suggested coordination, almost as if someone else inside the attic had been carefully observing the man's movements while maintaining distance. Emily felt a deep chill settle across her shoulders as she realized the second presence might have been studying both the intruder and her family simultaneously. As evening approached, Emily prepared dinner while Tyler completed homework at the kitchen counter, blissfully unaware of the surveillance review that had consumed her entire afternoon. She tried to maintain normal conversation, though her attention remained divided between Tyler's cheerful stories about school and the live camera feed displayed on her phone. Around sunset, she walked toward the hallway closet to retrieve cleaning supplies, determined to face the ventilation opening directly rather than allowing fear to control her movements. She opened the closet door slowly, shining her phone's flashlight toward the narrow vent above the shelf. The metal grate reflected dimly under the light, appearing perfectly undisturbed. Emily stepped closer, lifting herself slightly onto her toes to inspect the vent interior through the slats. At first, she saw only darkness and floating dust particles drifting lazily in the confined space. She almost stepped back when a faint scraping sound echoed softly above the ceiling, subtle enough to blend with ordinary house-settling noises, yet unmistakably deliberate in rhythm. Emily's heart thudded against her ribs as the scraping sound traveled slowly across the crawlspace directly above the hallway. The noise paused, followed by what sounded like a faint shifting weight pressing against the vent opening just inches above her face. She held her breath, frozen beneath the grate, while her flashlight beam trembled across the metal surface. For several seconds nothing happened, and she nearly convinced herself the sound had been her imagination. Then the vent cover vibrated slightly under unseen pressure, producing a quiet metallic rattle that made Emily stumble backward in terror, and as she dropped her phone,
momentarily, she could swear she heard a whispering breath slip through the vent slats, forming a faint, almost human exhale that sounded disturbingly close to her name. Emily staggered backward from the closet, her pulse racing uncontrollably as the echo of that faint breath lingered in her ears. The sound had not resembled random airflow or structural noise shifting through the ventilation system. It had carried cadence, something disturbingly close to human rhythm, and her mind refused to dismiss the possibility that it had shaped itself into her name. She stared at the vent cover, half expecting it to tremble again, but the hallway returned to complete stillness, as though the house itself had exhaled and fallen silent afterward. Tyler's distant voice drifted from the kitchen, asking where she had placed his math worksheet, grounding her momentarily in the ordinary world she was desperately trying to protect. Emily forced herself to answer him calmly while retrieving the fallen phone from the closet floor. Her hands trembled as she checked the live attic camera feed, hoping to catch movement that would confirm what she had just experienced. The crawlspace appeared unchanged, showing only dim insulation stacks and wooden beams stretching into shadow. She adjusted brightness levels repeatedly, searching for the slightest shift that might indicate presence. The image remained frustratingly still, offering no evidence of the scraping sound or whispered breath that had shaken her seconds earlier.
Determined not to panic Tyler, Emily resumed dinner preparations while her thoughts spiraled through terrifying possibilities. She considered calling the police again, but hesitated, knowing they had already inspected the crawlspace earlier that afternoon without finding anyone inside. Doubt gnawed at her reasoning, whispering that she might be unraveling under stress, yet the clarity of what she heard refused to fade. She found herself glancing repeatedly toward the hallway, expecting to see the closet door slowly open or hear footsteps drifting across the ceiling overhead. After Tyler went to bed later that evening, Emily sat alone in the living room, replaying attic footage from earlier dates while listening carefully for any sounds traveling through the house. The quiet pressed heavily against her senses until a sudden motion alert flashed across her phone once again, triggered by the attic camera at exactly 2:12 a.m. Her breath caught as she opened the playback, bracing herself for another glimpse of the bearded intruder or the unseen second presence that had haunted her recordings.
The footage revealed the crawl space bathed in faint infrared light, appearing empty for nearly 30 seconds before insulation near the far sleeping area began shifting slowly outward. Emily leaned closer, her heart hammering violently as a hand emerged from beneath the insulation padding. The hand looked thinner than the bearded man's, with unusually long fingers moving with deliberate control rather than frantic survival instinct. The figure crawled partially into view, remaining low to the wooden floor as though avoiding direct exposure to the camera lens. Its movements carried unsettling precision, pausing frequently as if listening for activity below. The figure reached toward the abandoned sleeping area, carefully gathering items left behind by the first intruder. It folded blankets neatly, collected scattered wrappers, and placed them inside a small plastic container retrieved from the shadows. Emily's stomach twisted as she watched the meticulous organization, sensing calculated intelligence behind every motion. The figure never revealed its face, keeping its head angled downward while working in silence. After several minutes, it slowly turned toward the attic hatch leading into Emily's hallway closet. Emily felt her throat tighten as the figure crawled closer to the hatch entrance, stopping just inches from the opening that connected directly above where she had heard her name whispered earlier that evening. The figure remained frozen there for nearly 10 seconds, its body tense as if sensing something through the wooden barrier below. Emily leaned forward unconsciously, her eyes locked onto the screen, while dread crawled deeper into her chest. Then, without warning, the figure lifted its head slightly toward the camera for the first time, and although shadows concealed most facial features, the infrared lighting briefly illuminated a pale grin stretching unnaturally wide across its face, before the camera feed abruptly cut to static, leaving Emily staring at a blank screen that reflected her horrified expression back at her.
Emily sat frozen on the living room couch, gripping her phone while the blank static screen slowly transitioned back into the camera application's main menu. Her reflection stared back at her through the darkened display, pale and shaken in a way she barely recognized. The image of that unnatural grin burned into her memory with terrifying clarity. The expression had not resembled survival desperation like the first intruder's frantic behavior. It had carried awareness, almost satisfaction, as if the second presence understood it had finally been seen and wanted that moment acknowledged. Her chest tightened as she replayed the footage repeatedly, hoping the system might recover the final seconds before the static interruption. Each replay ended the same way, cutting off just after the figure lifted its head. The missing segment felt intentional rather than accidental, as though someone had deliberately severed the recording. Emily's thoughts raced through horrifying possibilities, wondering if the second intruder had tampered with the surveillance system from inside the crawl space. The idea felt impossible, yet disturbingly plausible, considering the careful cleanliness investigators had described earlier. She forced herself to stand, pacing slowly across the living room while glancing repeatedly toward the hallway closet. The house felt suffocatingly quiet, amplifying every small noise produced by shifting air vents and distant traffic outside. Emily considered waking Tyler and leaving immediately, yet exhaustion and disbelief anchored her in place. She needed more evidence before completely abandoning the house, even though every instinct screamed that staying placed her family in unimaginable danger. Determined to regain control, Emily opened archived footage again, this time reviewing recordings captured weeks before she installed the attic camera. She focused on the kitchen and living room feeds, scanning for irregular patterns she might have overlooked. After nearly an hour of intense searching, she noticed something subtle but deeply unsettling. On multiple nights, faint reflections appeared across reflective surfaces like the microwave door and glass cabinet panels. The reflections resembled partial silhouettes positioned just outside the camera's primary frame, shapes that seemed to linger briefly before vanishing seconds later.
Emily zoomed into one recording captured 3 weeks earlier, watching herself wash dishes while Tyler played video games in the living room behind her. As she scrubbed a plate, a reflection shimmered across the microwave door beside her shoulder. The reflection suggested someone standing just beyond the kitchen entryway, though the camera angle failed to capture anything directly. Emily felt nausea twist her stomach as she realized these reflections had appeared repeatedly across different nights, forming a disturbing pattern that suggested prolonged observation inside her home long before the bearded man had been discovered. Her breathing grew shallow as she continued scanning recordings, documenting timestamps where similar reflections surfaced. The pattern revealed something even more terrifying. The reflections occurred most frequently during moments when Emily and Tyler were engaged in routine activities like cooking, watching television, or preparing for bed. The timing felt calculated, almost as if the second presence had been studying their daily behaviors with deliberate patience, learning rhythms and vulnerabilities while remaining invisible. As Emily leaned forward to document another timestamp, a sudden motion alert flashed across her phone once again, triggered by the kitchen camera live feed. Her heart pounded violently as she opened the notification, expecting to see an intruder standing behind her. The live video displayed the kitchen empty and dimly lit by the overhead fixture she had forgotten to turn off. Relief almost surfaced before her eyes shifted toward the far corner of the camera frame, where the refrigerator door stood partially open. Emily's stomach dropped as she stared at the open refrigerator, certain she had closed it earlier that night. The door swung slightly back and forth as if disturbed by recent movement, revealing shelves where food items appeared rearranged in subtle, unfamiliar patterns. She watched in paralyzing silence as the refrigerator door slowly creaked wider, exposing deeper darkness inside the kitchen corner. And just as the door reached its widest point, the overhead kitchen light flickered once before shutting off completely, leaving the camera feed submerged in pitch-black darkness, while faint rustling sounds echoed softly through the microphone for the first time since installation. Emily stared at the darkened kitchen feed while her reflection hovered faintly across the black screen of her phone. The sudden loss of light combined with the soft rustling audio created a suffocating silence inside the living room. She strained to hear beyond her own breathing, hoping the microphone might capture something identifiable.
The faint noise continued for several seconds, resembling slow movement against plastic or paper packaging, followed by what sounded like the gentle closing of the refrigerator door. The audio abruptly stopped, leaving the feed submerged in complete stillness once again. Her hands trembled as she refreshed the live view, but the kitchen camera remained disabled, displaying only an error message indicating temporary signal interference. Panic surged through her chest as she checked the attic camera next. The crawlspace feed remained active, showing insulation stacks resting undisturbed beneath the dull glow of infrared light. Emily scanned every corner of the frame desperately, searching for even the slightest movement that could explain the interruption downstairs. The crawlspace looked completely abandoned, yet the silence inside her home felt heavier than any physical presence she had witnessed before. Emily forced herself to stand and walk cautiously toward the kitchen hallway, clutching her phone like a fragile lifeline. Every step across the wooden floor echoed louder than usual, heightening her awareness of the vulnerable space surrounding her. She paused near the hallway entrance, listening carefully for any shifting sounds beyond the corner. The house remained eerily quiet, creating an unnatural stillness that felt more threatening than open chaos. Slowly, she stepped into the kitchen and reached for the light switch beside the doorway. The overhead fixture flickered twice before illuminating the room with its familiar yellow glow. Emily's eyes immediately locked onto the refrigerator, confirming that the door now sat fully closed. She moved closer cautiously, her heartbeat thudding in her ears as she reached for the handle. When she opened the door, her stomach tightened as she studied the contents arranged across the shelves. Food containers had been repositioned into neat rows, grouped by size and color in a pattern she had never organized herself. Even Tyler's juice boxes had been aligned precisely, each label facing forward with disturbing perfection.
Emily stepped back slowly, her mind racing through horrifying conclusions. The second presence had not only entered her kitchen, but had manipulated objects with deliberate care, almost as though it had been studying how her household functioned. She grabbed her phone again and attempted to reconnect the disabled kitchen camera, refreshing the application repeatedly until the live feed finally restored. The video displayed her standing in front of the refrigerator exactly as she was in real life, yet something about the image unsettled her immediately. Behind her reflection on the screen, the hallway doorway appeared darker than the surrounding walls, forming a shadow that stretched unnaturally across the kitchen floor. Emily slowly turned around, expecting to see someone standing just outside the room. The hallway remained empty, yet when she looked back at her phone, the shadow behind her had grown longer, stretching across the tile until it nearly touched her feet in the video feed. Her breathing slowed into shallow panic as she studied the screen, realizing the shadow moved differently from her own body's natural lighting pattern. It shifted subtly with delayed timing, as though something invisible stood behind her, mirroring her movements with calculated patience. Emily lowered the phone slightly, unable to stop herself from turning again toward the empty hallway. Nothing stood there, and the silence pressed heavily against her senses. When she raised the phone again, her blood turned cold as she noticed a new detail forming in the video feed. The shadow no longer stood directly behind her reflection. Instead, it had moved closer to Tyler's bedroom hallway, stretching toward the corner where his bedroom door remained slightly open. And as Emily stared in growing horror, she realized the shadow was slowly sliding across the floor toward her son's room, as though it had finally decided to stop watching and start entering their lives directly.
Emily's heart slammed violently against her ribs as she watched the shadow stretch across the kitchen feed, sliding toward Tyler's bedroom hallway with slow, deliberate movement. Panic surged through her body with a clarity she had never experienced before, stripping away hesitation and replacing it with raw instinct. He dropped the refrigerator door without closing it and rushed toward the hallway, her footsteps echoing sharply across the tile and hardwood floor. Every movement felt dangerously loud, as if announcing her awareness to something that preferred silence. The hallway grew colder as she approached Tyler's bedroom, though she could not explain why. The overhead lights remained steady, casting ordinary illumination across framed family photos and pale painted walls, yet the air carried a dense stillness that pressed against her lungs. Tyler's bedroom door remained slightly open, allowing a thin strip of warm lamplight to spill into the hallway carpet. Emily slowed her pace as she reached the doorway, bracing herself for a sight she could not fully imagine but feared with overwhelming certainty. She pushed the door open gently and found Tyler asleep beneath his dinosaur-patterned blanket, curled peacefully on his side, with one arm hanging loosely over the mattress edge. Relief flooded her chest so quickly that her knees nearly weakened beneath her. She stepped inside quietly, scanning the corners of the room, checking beneath the bed, inside the closet, and behind the curtains. Everything appeared normal, untouched, and harmless. The gentle rhythm of Tyler's breathing grounded her momentarily, reminding her of the fragile world she was fighting to protect. Emily sat carefully on the edge of his bed, brushing her fingers lightly through his hair while trying to slow her racing thoughts. She glanced back toward the hallway, half expecting to see movement lingering beyond the doorway. The hallway remained empty, yet her instincts refused to relax. She reached for her phone again, opening the live kitchen camera feed with trembling anticipation. The video displayed the kitchen exactly as she had left it, the refrigerator door still open, lights glowing softly against the silent room. The shadow that had been sliding across the floor was no longer visible. Her relief felt fragile and incomplete, lingering beneath layers of uncertainty that refused to fade. She refreshed the camera application again, cycling through each installed feed methodically. The attic camera remained unchanged, showing insulation and wooden beams resting under infrared light without disturbance. She switched back to the kitchen camera once more, determined to confirm the shadow's disappearance before allowing herself to breathe normally.
When the kitchen feed reloaded, Emily felt her chest tighten as her eyes drifted toward the reflection of the hallway, visible through the polished microwave door. The reflection revealed a faint distortion standing just outside Tyler's bedroom doorway, shaped vaguely like a crouched silhouette leaning toward the room's entrance. Emily turned her head slowly toward the real hallway outside Tyler's door, her pulse pounding violently as she prepared to confront whatever might be standing there. The hallway remained empty again, perfectly still beneath the ceiling lights. She swallowed hard, convinced she was losing her grip on reality, until she looked back down at her phone screen. The reflection inside the microwave door had shifted closer to Tyler's bedroom entrance, the crouched shape now angled inward as if peering directly at her and her sleeping son from beyond the visible frame. Emily's breath caught as she stared at the screen, unable to move or scream, frozen beneath the crushing realization that whatever presence had lived inside her home had not been searching for shelter or survival. The shadow had been studying them, learning their habits, waiting patiently for vulnerability.
As she clutched her phone tightly, the reflection inside the microwave door began stretching upward slowly, forming a taller silhouette that leaned closer to Tyler's bedroom entrance with unsettling curiosity. And just before the camera feed flickered slightly, Emily noticed the bedroom door behind her begin to creak inward on its own, moving a fraction closer to shutting them inside the room together. Emily's body locked in place as she watched Tyler's bedroom door inch inward behind her, the slow creak slicing through the silence with unbearable precision. Her breath caught in her throat, while her instincts screamed for movement, yet fear held her frozen beside her sleeping son. The hallway light spilled across the narrowing gap of the doorway, creating a thin blade of brightness that stretched across the carpet toward the foot of Tyler's bed. Every second felt elongated, forcing Emily to confront the terrifying certainty that the presence she had sensed for weeks no longer intended to remain hidden. She turned slowly, her pulse pounding violently as her eyes locked onto the door handle. The handle twitched faintly, rotating just enough to confirm that pressure existed on the other side. Emily forced herself to stand, shielding Tyler instinctively while staring at the slowly closing door. The movement stopped abruptly when she stepped closer, leaving the door hanging half shut, as though something had retreated the moment she acknowledged it. The hallway outside remained empty when she pushed the door open again, revealing only quiet walls and dim lighting stretching toward the living room. Her hands trembled as she backed away from the doorway, refusing to turn her back on the hallway. Tyler stirred slightly but remained asleep, unaware of the invisible tension pressing against the room. Emily grabbed her phone again, opening the kitchen camera feed while standing inside the bedroom. The video revealed the kitchen still glowing beneath the overhead lights, yet the reflection on the microwave door showed the hallway outside Tyler's bedroom far more clearly than her direct view allowed. Emily's stomach twisted as she watched the reflection display a tall, elongated shadow standing motionless just outside the bedroom entrance, its silhouette distorted in ways that made it appear almost jointless, bending slightly at unnatural angles. Her breathing became shallow as she stared at the screen, realizing the shadow had not retreated at all. It had simply shifted into a place where it could observe without being seen directly. The reflection showed the silhouette leaning slowly toward the doorway again, stretching across the hallway floor until it touched the threshold of Tyler's bedroom in the video feed. Emily's grip tightened around her phone as terror and clarity merged into one horrifying understanding. Whatever had lived inside her attic had never been searching for escape. It had been watching, studying, and waiting for familiarity to replace fear. A faint scraping sound echoed above the ceiling again, drifting across the crawlspace with slow, deliberate movement. Emily lifted her eyes toward the ceiling instinctively, listening as the sound traveled from one end of the house to the other, stopping directly above Tyler's bedroom. The overhead drywall produced a subtle settling noise, followed by a soft tapping that resembled fingers tracing across wooden beams just inches above them. Emily clutched Tyler tightly, unable to stop the tears forming in her eyes as the house around her felt suddenly occupied by something that no longer needed to hide. Moments later, the tapping ceased, leaving only suffocating silence behind. Emily stared at her phone one final time, noticing the microwave reflection had returned to normal, the hallway appearing empty once again. The sudden disappearance offered no comfort, only the sickening realization that the presence could withdraw whenever it chose, remaining somewhere inside the structure of the house, where walls and ceilings formed endless hiding places.
Authorities never found the second occupant, despite extended investigation, and the crawlspace was eventually sealed permanently. Emily moved out weeks later, desperate to rebuild safety somewhere else. Yet neighbors reported strange maintenance issues continuing inside the abandoned rental. Lights flickered without explanation. Food deliveries left inside the abandoned kitchen occasionally disappeared overnight, and contractors repairing the attic refused to return after claiming they heard slow movement above them while working. Some homes carry memories long after people leave them behind. Others hold something far more patient, something that learns routines and waits quietly inside walls where no camera can fully reach. If this story unsettles you and you enjoy psychological horror inspired by real-life phenomena, make sure to subscribe to Canon of Darkness and stay with us, because the next story will make you question whether silence inside your home truly means you are ever alone.